各位观众朋友大家好，欢迎收看2022年国家地理台湾摄影大赛征件序幕访谈，我是今天的主持人林书伟。首先来介绍今天与会的2位贵宾，介绍的是国家地理杂志的总编辑李永适总编辑，总编辑好。
主持人好，各位朋友大家好。
继续介绍的是我们这一次的赞助单位纬创资通，同时也是纬创人文基金会的董事长林宪铭董事长，董事长好。
主持人好，各位观众大家好。
首先，我们邀请李总编先来跟我们分享一下在2022年这一次的国家地理台湾摄影大赛当中有什么特殊性，还有它的征件条件大概是什么？
好的。国家地理杂志其实一直以摄影著称哈。那么它创刊于1888年，到今年已经有134年的历史了。那么这100多年来，实际上就是以精彩的照片以真实的记录来感动人心啊。那么我们一直希望能够推广这样的一个摄影的精神，所以我们从2015年开始也创办了这个台湾地区的国家地理的摄影大赛，到2019年已经有5年的时间了啊。那这2年因为疫情的一些其他的因素呢，暂时停止办理。那今年我们很高兴我们有这个纬创人文基金会的赞助呢，我们可以重新来启动这样的一个活动。那么这次的活动呢，跟过去一样，都有人物、地方、自然那么同时我们有一个生态永续的组别。另外比较特殊的是，我们这次限定我们拍摄的地点必须在台湾我们希望鼓励更多的朋友、摄影的爱好者能够去记录我们自己身边的故事，自己身边的，尤其是生态环境方面的一些情况的记录。
好，已经停了2年的摄影大赛，这一次再恢复举办相信很多的朋友都跃跃欲试了。那同时呢，也非常感谢我们的赞助单位纬创资通、纬创人文基金会，这一次这个赞助我们的国家地理台湾摄影大赛的活动，其实跟他们企业理念也是不谋而合。那请教一下董事长，您这一次怎么样跟我们的摄影大赛有结缘的？
谢谢。纬创人文基金会实际上讲，对于台湾的生态关注已经很久了。那我们也过去也很努力的把生态跟人文之间做有效的结合。所以我们过去呢，花了很多的心血呢，跟很多单位合作，做这个湿地的复育，所以对于台湾生态的教育，以及利用这个生态让人文可以共同的提升，我们做了很多的努力。那我们也一直感觉到国家地理杂志一直是用摄影的角度来表现整个生态的美、生态的重要。那这一点跟我们的想法是非常非常一致的，所以我们就非常高兴能够有这么一个机会，如果能够让我们的摄影同好用他的专业，利用这个平台，能够在台湾让一个非常具有震撼力的照片，能够让大家对于生态的重视，同时也能够透过这个照片表现的方法，表现一种人文的力量。我想这个跟我们的想法是非常非常的契合。那我想呢，我们也一直希望能够在台湾的生态跟人文之间取得平衡，共同能够前进的这条路上找更多的伙伴。那国家地理杂志一直是我们长期的伙伴，那我们也希望如果各位观众有兴趣的话，那么可以多的去看我们的网站，应该会发现我们有其他共同努力的一些活动。那我们确实是非常高兴能够让这个摄影这个大赛呢可以再恢复，这是很好的一件事情。
非常谢谢董事长，谢谢。那这一次呢，包括了董事长刚刚所提到的，还有总编刚刚所提到的，这一次的比赛有一点点不一样的地方就是第一，它是要以台湾作为背景大家要去探索台湾的美。那再来呢，就是我们这一次呢，成人组有4大主题，分别就是人物、地方、自然跟生态永续。那其中生态永续这样的主题呢，是第一次设置的，也响应了纬创人文基金会长期以来对台湾这片土地所做的生 态富裕还有努力等等啊。那这部分是不是请总编辑再补充一下？
是，我们为了这次鼓励更多的人来参与这个生态永续的这个组别，那么这个深入的来记录我们台湾的生态环境，所以我们对于这次奖项设置有一个特殊的安排啊，我们特别请到了我们国内著名的这个纪录片的导演柯金元柯师傅啊，那么他会带领我们这个组别的得奖人啊，亲自去做一个生态报道啊，那么大家可以跟随这个等于我们的纪录片大师一起去了解环境报道的这个更深入的一些技巧跟细节。
好，所以可以有机会跟着柯大师一起去记录，这个是很多参赛者他们大概梦寐以求的事情。好，那这一次的这个永续生态这样子的一个主题哦，参赛者可以以5张照片作为一组，那有4种主题可以选择哦，包括了动植物的保育啦，海洋保育、水陆湿地的生态，还有就是气候变迁的故事。那事实上这次为了要展现整个画面呈现出来的精髓，是不是你们也请到了国家地理杂志的特约摄影师？
是
这个是陈玉文老师一起到纬创人文基金会他们所赋予的场域来做记录。
对，这个陈玉文老师是我们长期配合的这个摄影师，那么也非常了解我们国家地理的风格，所以这次我们特别请他到这个我们纬创人文基金会赋予的很多的这个生态公园啊、湿地的这些地方去做比较深入的记录。那么这次的记录也这个非常的精彩，
是好跋山涉水留下珍贵的影像，那也可以作为所有参赛者的一个参考。纬创人文基金会他们长期以来一直在做生态富裕还有包括了这个整个大环境的一个改善就是人跟自然要共生共存这样的议题一直非常的关注。那今年累月以来，可以说就是纬创资通每一个同仁他们内在的 DNA 就已经存在了这部分再请董事长来分享一下。
好，谢谢。我们在推动这个生态平衡的时候，我们事实上并没有想到生态平衡跟永续之间的一种直接的关系，尤其是现在大家非常重视的 ESG， 整个企业的永续经营，逐渐的我们呢体会到呢，其实整个 ESG 它的精神，我们可以把它看成 E 呢是生态之美， S 呢是社会的善，至于这个 G 呢，它就是治理之真了。所以其实它包含了我们对于真善美的追求。那尤其是生态之美，过去这些年我们也知道，透过像国家地理杂志这种努力，透过我们在台湾推动了或者是赞助了非常多的湿地，其实是让我们的同仁本身也有很多志工。那这个呢，让我们同仁自己也感觉到有相当高的参与感。那也同时让大家呢从这里去体会到，原来我们过去所做的努力跟我们的永续经营是契合的，是真正的走向未来的一条路。所以我们透过这样子一个类似像比较属于软性的这种活动，那我们也希望能够不只是让我们的同仁，让我们的这个关系人，我们的社会都能够更积极的去了解到对于生态之美的追求跟责任。
谢谢董事长那透过了纬创的这个人文基金会不断的向下扎根，其实也是抛砖引玉，也呼吁更多的企业，包括我们每一个人都可以来响应生态保育要向下扎根。那今天非常谢谢董事长，也谢谢总编辑。我们的摄影大赛从即刻起一直到3月18号，欢迎大家一起来报名，让我们用每一种可能的角度来探索台湾之美。各位观众朋友大家好，欢迎收看2022年国家地理台湾摄影大赛征件序幕访谈，我是今天的主持人林书伟。首先来欢迎今天现场的2位贵宾，首先欢迎的是农委会林务局的林华庆局长，欢迎。
大家好。
继续欢迎的是台湾永续能源研究基金会简又新董事长，他同时也是我们的无任所大使。大使好。
各位观众大家好。
好，今天邀请到2位专家来现场啊，我们要来关心的就是台湾的永续发展环境，还有这一次的摄影大赛，其实跟我们的环境真的是息息相关，尤其是森林可以说是台湾生态存续的命脉。只不过呢，往往被很多人所忽略。但是我们看到农委会林务局有这几年用它的出版品来接地气，让更多的国内外民众了解到台湾森林之美。那先请局长来跟我们分享一下，你们到底做了些什么呢？
好的，谢谢。如同书伟刚刚所讲的森林是我们台湾生态的这个命脉事实上，森林呢也是我们居住在这块岛上面每一个人的生存的命脉那这么重要的一个生态环境，可是我们大家还是常常没有办法真正去理解到它对我们的重要性。所以林务局在这几年就特别不管是运用我们的出版品或者是一些周边商品来提醒或者是跟大家分享森林的重要性。那透过这样的分享呢，我们其实就是很简单的希望担任一个桥梁，让我们民众呢透过林务局来认识，借由这些不同的媒材来认识体验我们台湾的森林的生态。
是，那透过了出版品，同时我们是用眼睛来欣赏，跟这一次的摄影大赛一样，希望透过影像让更多人来关注台湾的美好，同时也关注到生态发展、生态保育上面这样的议题。那事实上这几年的趋势不论是公部门或是民间团体，都非常提倡所谓的 ESG。那 ESG 的指标呢，在这个国际上其实也会变成是一个企业评判它未来发展性的一个非常重要的指标。那这个部分我们请简又新董事长简大使来跟我们分享一下。
好，我想最近几年来全世界所有的企业都非常关心 ESG 这个 E 是代表环境的永续， S 代表社会的公平正义， G 代表公司的治理。那么讲到 E 呢，当然很重要一件事情就是生态保育。那么生态保育对台湾讲是非常的重要，因为台湾是全世界非常少有的，大家公认它的所有的物种，不管是动物或者是生物、植物等等，它的物种是最丰富、最多的地方。但是在过去这么多年里面，也有被破坏不少。那我们觉得这一次的国家地理杂志能够以摄影来突出台湾这边的一些优势，也看到我们一些困难，我觉得非常有意义。因为我们在看过去所有的环境保护的运动中，每一次影响最大的都是从镜头上来的，从照片上来的。因为我们从镜头里面可以看到整个世界之美，台湾之美，反过来也可以看到我们世界的危机，台湾的危机。我们希望能带大家一起来关心我们台湾之美跟台湾未来可能的一些风险。
谢谢简大使的分享事实上我们也希望透过这一次的摄影大赛大家用双眼去观察到台湾美好之外，还有面临什么样子生态保育上面的危机。那刚才林务局的局长也跟我们分享到，林局长也提到这几年林务局用各种的出版品，也就是透过不管是绘图，不管是影像不管是周边的商品，像我们现场也看到了很多这都是秒杀品那这些艺术品它跟民众之间的结合就非常的亲切，而且很接地气。所以透过这样的形式是不是让民众更能够了解到生态保育的重要性？
对，没有错我们虽然每个人都有五感但是视觉其实还是大部分人最直接，他会立即的接收到这个外界讯息的一个感官。那我想这也是为什么我们过去这几年会特别去重视我们的出版品或者其他的相关的这些产品，它的视觉上面的这些设计，因为它可以让我们的这个载体呢，它更加的温暖，然后提升它的可亲近性。摄影本身它就是一个视觉艺术的呈现那透过摄影的这些作品，我想更可以让阅听者可以去有一种亲临现场的感觉， 那更加的有这种参与感，不管是对于我们生态环境之美，或者是生态这个环境被破坏的这个现场，我相信都可以激发更多的共鸣，甚至引发后续的一个行动去正向的改变。
我们透过这次的摄影大赛希望大家透过海陆空各种方式都可以记录一下台湾的美好。不过讲到生态保育其实台湾也面临了蛮巨大的挑战这部分请简大使来跟我们分享一下。
好，我想台湾在去年就面临到目前气候变迁最大的一个影响，我们干旱非常的久那全世界各地有大水，有火烧山等等，这些都来得非常的快，所以大家要一起来做这个工作。那么整个全世界的做法，根据联合国的现在的永续发展目标的第17项，它需要大家有伙伴关系，因为这是没有一个单位可以完成的事情。所以我们很看到这个知名国际的这个国家地理杂志，跟我们台湾非常知名的产业，比如说伟创公司等等，还有很多的 NGO 大家一起来合作，我相信这是能够从这里唤起大家对这问题的重视。整个生态保育可以是讲，人不是唯一生活在地球的生物，其他生物其实非常的脆弱。透过这样的一个摄影，让我们看得见我们要多珍惜以我们共同生活在这地球，在台湾所有生物，这样的话我们真正才能达到永续的家园，美丽的台湾。
谢谢简大使透过影像的说话透过影像的震撼，可以让我们更加了解台湾之美之外，还有台湾面临的挑战跟困境，包括了我们必须要跟世界接轨，在生态保育这个议题上面，每个人都是责无旁贷的希望大家共同来参与这一次的摄影大赛。再次感谢简又新大使，也再次感谢林局长今天的精彩分享。2022年国家地理摄影论坛，今年特别邀请到了国家地理空拍大师 George Steinmetz， 还有台湾环境纪录导演柯金元老师，全球100大知名水下摄影师 Yoko Summer， 集结了海陆空3大领域的摄影大师，要分享他们的影像创作的奥秘。同时，我们也邀请到了伟创人文基金会周文玲执行长来跟我们分享企业长期投入生态富裕的宝贵经验。敬请锁定国家地理杂志中文网，从每一个可能的角度来观看台湾之美。
Today, I'd like to share with you my own personal journey, one that started 40 years ago through the most remote corners of all 7 continents. I started out with a backpack and a very general curiosity about the world. And as I observed changes taking place, that curiosity evolved into a determination to explore environmental topics. I was a student at Stanford University studying geophysics, but was unsure what I wanted to do for a living. I decided to take a year off and go on a long hitchhiking trip across Africa. I used my geophysics major to get a job with an oil company and figured that if I lived cheaply, I could travel there for a year. I didn't know much about Africa, but it was the most different place I could imagine from the life of comfort that I had grown up with in California. This is me a few months later, somewhere in the Ituri forest in what they used to call Zaire. I bummed rides from Tunis to Kisangani to Khartoum as I learned to live on $10 a day. I thought I'd see bare-breasted women and people with big Disney lips, just like in the pages of National Geographic. So I brought a camera and taught myself how to take pictures as I learned French and Swahili from truck drivers along the way. This was a different Africa than exists today, with almost no paved roads, credit cards, or mobile telephones. I would show up in villages like this one in the mountains of Cameroon. Africans are very generous people, and they would invite me in and show me how they made a living from it. I didn't know much about photography, and even less about journalism, but I liked how getting pictures would push me into unusual situations. This is the king of a rebel movement in the Ruwenzori Mountains of Uganda. That lady holding the briefcase is his personal secretary, and the guys in back with guns are his royal guard. He gave me an interview which he addressed to members of the international press. Unfortunately for him, that was only me. After growing up leafing through the pages of National Geographic, I imagined what a National Geographic photographer might do, and I made up the rest. This is a photo permit I got when I arrived in South Sudan. I particularly like the paragraph at right where it says that I was forbidden to photograph nude persons, as most people in South Sudan at the time had no clothes. I spent a week in this Dinka cattle camp on the bank of the Nile and tried to participate in their way of life. The Dinka showed me how to tie papyrus into a shelter and how they had developed their culture and symbiotic way of life around the migratory cycles of their beloved cattle. This was like graduate school for me, an unguided tour of ecological ethnography, and I got busy taking notes with the camera. This is a father showing his son how to make a cattle tether from palm fronds. The Dinka smear dung ash on their bodies to keep the bugs from biting, and the dots you see on their skin were from a passing thunderstorm. With no money for rides, the truck drivers often let the Mzungu ride on top of the truck for free, or on the top of this train going across South Sudan. It was an amazing view from up there, but I remember thinking, wouldn't it be even better if I could get higher and soar like a bird over the African landscape? That dream of flying over Africa stuck with me, so 15 years later, after becoming a professional photographer, I talked National Geographic into a big story in the Central Sahara using a new kind of flying machine. This is me flying the lightest and slowest aircraft in the world with a backpack motor and a parachute-style wing. It's called a motorized paraglider, and the whole thing can be packed up and fit in the back of a Land Cruiser. Out in the desert, I could run to take off and land almost anywhere. This crazy-looking aircraft opened up new ways of seeing for me, as I could fly low and slow with an unrestricted view of both horizontal and vertical directions, like a flying lawn chair. I put together a short compilation of video clips from flights over various deserts to give you an idea of how my little aircraft works. It may seem a little dangerous, but I'm not an adventure dude. I'm a photographer who flies, not a pilot who takes pictures. And I never fly without a camera. Or as a mountaineering friend of mine says, I'm not a risk taker, I'm a risk manager. I had gotten married a month before I started paragliding. Unfortunately for me, my wife, Lisa Ben, is very tolerant. We met in Italy and we were both working as journalists, and she understands my need to explore the world. Lisa is amazing. While I was buzzing all over the desert with my flying lawn chair, she did all the work of raising our 3 wonderful children, and also held down a job as an editor at the Wall Street Journal. When I'm not at home, my favorite place is to be about 200 to 500 feet above ground, like what you see out of the airplane window just before landing. Flying lower than that is a little tricky, but I can fly with both hands on my camera and steer by crossing my legs, like in a kayak. My hitchhiker's dream finally came true when I captured these 2 camel caravans passing each other out in the Sahara. I had a major fogasm that morning. It's a kind of retinal to brain shock that photographers get when seeing something. You couldn't take this picture any other way. A plane would be too fast, and there were no helicopters in Niger. But even if there were, the camels would all run from the noise and downgrade. I realized that from this low and slow aircraft, I could capture the expanse of the African landscape with a human dimension. It was a key to opening up remote parts of the world that nobody had ever seen like this before. The motors are not super reliable, so deserts are ideally suited for paramotoring, as you can take off and land almost anywhere. I decided to explore a few more of them, and I didn't realize it, but it took me 15 years to photograph all the extreme deserts in 27 different countries. From the air, I could find all kinds of weird stuff, like this field of mobile sand in Saudi Arabia. This was taken before there were resources like Google Earth or drones, and I found this dune field by scouring satellite images given to me by some of the people at NASA. They were seeing similar kinds of windblown features on Mars. This is a volcanic crater in a remote part of the Libyan Sahara. It was tricky getting my flight gear into Libya during the Gaddafi regime, So a friend of mine drove it down from Amsterdam and told the border guards that my motor was a generator and the paraglider was a tent. Working in Iran was tricky too, and I think I was the first American permitted to fly a private aircraft there since the revolution. I felt like I was seeing the earth with its living skin peeled away. With my geological background, I felt like I was able to tell the story of the earth and its processes in a new way. Iran has the largest field of wind-eroded rocks in the world, a geological feature known as a yardang, which are also common on Mars. All that yardang silt had to go somewhere, and this is a very rare view of one of the world's largest dune fields in southern Iran. In Ethiopia, I was fascinated to see how humans have come to live in the world's most extreme environments, like these Afari nomads who extract salt from dry lake beds at 500 feet below sea level. There's also wildlife in the desert, and animals like these oryx in Abu Dhabi have adapted so that they can live their entire life without ever drinking water, getting all the moisture they need from the dew and sparse vegetation. The deserts are not just hot and dry. They are also cold and high, like the Altiplano of Bolivia. These are James flamingos, and over half of the global population lives on this one salt lake at 14,000 feet in the Bolivian Andes. They feed on red algae that thrive in the water of volcanic springs. When I explored the deserts, I often came across rock art that had been made many thousands of years ago. It was like a window into an ancient time, when most of the deserts were much wetter places than they are today, supporting savanna animals like giraffes and cattle you see drawn in these rocks. Balsa water from that era still supports life in some parts of the Sahara, like this area in northern Chad. It got me thinking about climate change in a new way. This is a view from the top of Mount Sahama, the highest point in Bolivia at 21,500 feet. It's about 4,500 meters. I went up there with scientists who were gathering ice samples, which had evidence of how the climate had been 14,000 years ago. At sunrise, the mountain cast a shadow out across the Andes, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to photograph those twin volcanoes on the horizon? So I went back there 10 years later at the same time of year and was stunned to see how much the ice had retreated. In this next photo, you can look at the cap of snow on that volcano. And then let's go back to the picture before, and you can see that the volcano you're seeing in the second photo is the one that's in the middle ground of the first photo. This next picture is from Timgad in Algeria. And Timgad was a sort of retirement community for old Roman soldiers. It's hard to believe the North African coast was once a breadbasket for the Roman Empire. But as Romans slowly degraded their own fields with poor farming practices, they brought them to the southern reaches of their African provinces. Timgad was preserved when it was buried by blowing sand some 700 years ago. Thousands of years ago, the Sahara was a much wetter place than it is today. This is on the shore of the Dead Sea in Israel. And this dock was built about 10 years ago, but the Dead Sea is dropping about 1 meter every year due to overexploitation of its water resources. I found similar tales in Saudi Arabia. These are alfalfa fields in the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, where you saw those really bizarre dune fields a few pictures ago. And these wells these green discs are made from irrigating or tapping into fossil water. They drill a well down in the center of the circles, and they can pump water for about 30 years until the resource is totally exhausted. And just like an empty oil field, the desert will dry up. My paraglider was really great for exploring remote landscapes, but to go over, to look at rising sea levels, I had to resort to helicopters. This was taken in the Netherlands, an area where they've recovered vast amounts of the Dutch landscape from the sea. And you can see they're using wind power to create electricity to pump water out of islands that were once mud flats at low tide. And this is the capital of the Maldives. The Maldives are an atoll nation. The capital, the capital is now, looks like they call it like a little Manhattan in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And because of all the development, there's no way for the coral to keep growing. And the capital of the Maldives, Male, is slowly sinking into the sea. It's all, I love the aerial perspective for seeing land usage is in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, where poor people have gathered in the mud flats that was it's really not suitable for habitation, but they're so poor there's no adequate transportation. So they want to have their city jobs, and they're extremely prone to typhoons on the mud flats. And climate change has also badly affected my native state of California. This is an area near Napa, California, the wine country. Shortly after climate change related fires swept through and burned out an entire neighborhood. I did an intensive project on climate change for the New York Times, Greenland, and looking at the Greenland ice sheet and how it's rapidly melting. The scientists putting dye in a surface river on the Greenland ice sheet, and then the water flows down through a crack in the ice sheet and then out to the sea. Most of the Greenland ice sheet is not chunking off into the ocean. It's actually melting in place. It's just kind of like the yellow penitente you saw in the Andes. It's just disappearing in place. And so with my experience in aerial photography, the Geographic asked me to do a story for them called Feeding 9 Billion, about how we're going to meet the future food demands. The first place they sent me was to Kansas during the wheat harvest. And this is the farm of the Volgamore family. These guys are the biggest, most successful farmers in their county in Kansas. And I realized that to capture the magnitude of the issue, how we're going to feed humanity, I needed to photograph mega farms to show, the size of the challenge that we're facing. And Brian Volgamore, he's a really smart farmer, and he has his own plane so he can fly over the fields and see when they're ready to be harvested. And he took me over a cattle feedlot. I went back again the next morning with my paraglider because I wanted to get a little more precise view. And this is the feedlot, and then behind it you see a center pivot irrigation, kind of like what you saw in Saudi Arabia. It's a great way for extracting water and efficiently in a dry landscape, and using the alfalfa fields in the background for feeding the cattle. And I was flying over the field taking pictures when my flight assistant came on the radio. He told me that the manager of the feedlot was really upset, and he wanted me and explain what I was doing. And I said, well, just tell him I'm working for National Geographic, and I'll explain to him that what I'm doing when I land. He goes, no, he wants you to come now. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but the light's beautiful. I'm taking pictures. I'll see when I get down. He said, well, George, if you don't come down right away, I think this guy's going to call the sheriff. I said, well, if he wants to call the sheriff, call the sheriff. It's a free country. When I landed, my assistant and I ended up in Finney County Jail. When I was arrested, they confiscated my aircraft, my car, my cameras. And I got them all back, but I realized that there were certain parts of the industrial food industry that don't want us to see where our food comes from. And it made me, it's kind of, as a journalist, when you ask somebody a question and they get all nervous and clam up, you realize that you're really on the heart of the story. So as I proceeded to photograph the story, I started looking more intensively, particularly at animal operations, because those are the ones that people don't want you to see. This is one of the largest cattle slaughterhouses in the United States. This is the Tyson Slaughterhouse in Amarillo, Texas. And there are a lot of issues around food that the producers don't really want to have well known. This is the floration of almonds in California. In the United States, about 2/3 of the commercial beekeepers descend on California for the almond harvest. And not only do they need intensive pollination, but every almond that we eat consumes about a gallon of water to be produced. The American diet is very high in protein. This is the produce section of a Costco. It's kind of a typical mega food store that we have throughout the United States. And this is the vegetable section, but Americans have very high consumption of meat. And if the rest of the world consumes as much meat as we consume in the United States, I just don't know how we have enough global resources to handle that. This is the soybean harvest in Mato Grosso. And the area, little strip of forest, you see that there's a river in there. And under Brazilian law, you can't farm within a certain distance of the river. So they retain this little teeny strip of land, but it's very difficult for wildlife to survive in these little narrow corridors. This is in the more tropical parts of the Amazon, where most of the deforestation is for raising cattle. And the two trees you see there, one live, one dead, those are Brazil nut trees. Under Brazilian law, it's illegal to cut down Brazil nut trees, but the Brazil nut trees don't live very long with all the rest of the forest gone. And so in a few years, this is going to be transformed into savanna landscape. And unfortunately, the climate is changing too. It's becoming a lot drier because in the summertime or in the hot season, there's no forest to absorb and re-emit all the water. And as they cut down the Amazon, they realize that they're missing some of the benefits of the forest. This is a large chicken farm in Brazil, an egg farm. And after they cut down the forest to grow soybeans, they realized that the chickens were all dying from disease, and so they planted an artificial forest of eucalyptus around them that is kind of an air filter for the chickens. Because when you have 4 million chickens that are genetically identical, if one gets sick, they all get sick. So this is a highly biosecure environment. This is inside the largest egg farm in Brazil. They had 4 million chickens producing 2.7 million eggs a day, and all the eggs are produced without ever touching a human hand. Everything gets moved by conveyor belts, including the eggs. This is one of the largest pig farms in Brazil. This is international standard quality pig farm. In the Amazon, they don't have very good road network, and they produce a lot of cheap soybeans, some of the cheapest soybeans in the world. So they realized that it was actually more cost effective to export the pigs than the soybeans, because for every pound of pork, they need to consume about 3 pounds of soybeans. So they could, with the same amount of shipping, they could get more revenue. And most of the pigs in Brazil, as well as the rest of the world, are raised in these gestation crates where the sows can barely stand up and lie down, but when they can't roll over and crush their offspring. But virtually all the pork you eat in the world is produced in this way. Brazil's most of their soybean exports go to China, and this is the port we're receiving them near Shanghai. It's a custom port. There were 3 ships offloading soybeans, all 3 from Brazil. What you see on the right is a massive bulk cargo container, a massive ship just full of soybeans. And this was used for creating soy products, soy sauce, tofu, as well as a lot of pig food. In China, the diets have started to change with rising affluence, and people want more exotic foods and they want more protein, particularly like pork and chicken and seafood. This is the largest pork slaughterhouse in the world. There are over 1,000 people in the cutting floor. It's very difficult getting an operation like this, but I found it easier in China, Brazil, and the United States. In the United States, I still haven't been able to get into a slaughter operation. And in China, there's been a tremendous loss of arable land. A lot of the land that's used for production is areas that are very difficult to farm. This is in the Loess Plateau, where a hilly area was terraced, but it's very hard to machine harvest these areas. And and most of the farm kids don't want to work in the farms. They want a city job. And so the farmers are aging, and there are less and less people to farm these difficult landscapes. It's a beautiful life, but it's a life of hard labor. And as China demands more and more food, they've been turning to the sea. And this is one of the largest ports, one of the largest fishing ports in China, just south of Shanghai. And there's been so much overfishing, they've had to close the fishing season for about half the year. And this is the day before they open the season. All the boats are ready to head out. Most of the fishing fleets here, they're subsidized by the government, the construction, the fuel, and because the country is desperate to get more protein and be control of the production. As the area's gotten fished out, they've turned to different kinds of aquaculture. This is a seaweed farm where they're putting little strands of seaweed onto ropes that are hung in the water. And seaweed is a very popular snack food for fish. And they developed very innovative ways for drying the seaweed. This is air drying it. It's a lot cleaner than putting it on the ground to dry. And these racks are kind of like a giant laundry racks that they lift up. Most of the aquaculture in China and the rest of the world depends on fish food. You have to feed those shrimp and salmon something. And the dominant food is the Peruvian anchoveta. And this is a purseiner off the coast of Peru, owned by a Chinese company. And as they were pulling in their net, the seals were having a feeding frenzy, jumping in and out to feast on the anchoveta. The anchoveta is generally not used for human consumption. Right? What we're seeing in the oceans is that as we kind of eat all the most desirable fish, we're getting into kinds of fish that people don't want. So they use that for fish farms for things that we do want. But the conversion ratio of live fish to farm fish is quite high. And so it takes a few pounds of wild fish to create 1 pound of farm fish. This is one of the largest, the largest fish meal factory in Peru, again owned by a Chinese company. The Chinese system has been very vertically integrated. They want to control the entire food chain. This is in Norway. It's the biggest salmon producer in the world. And those little circles there, each one of those holds 200,000 salmon. That little boat on the lower right, that's the feed barge. And they have those little white tubes, they're pneumatic tubes, and they shoot fish pellets down to the circles, and they have like a sprinkler that distributes the fish food. And the lights that you see, those are for video cameras, so they can make sure all the fish food is being eaten. And this is the hatchery for the fish farms. This is this company, again, they're the biggest in the world. They control about, I think about 40% of the salmon market. And they have the largest fish factory in the world because the fish are all genetically identical. They're all gutted and filleted by robots. These are hyper-efficient operations, and this is the largest. This is the largest shrimp farm in the world. This shrimp farm was built on the coast of Indonesia, and they took out about 100, 200 chicken nuts. They took out, it was 100 square kilometers of mangrove was converted to a shrimp farm, and they gave each family 2 of these little pens to tend through the year. But the scheme collapsed, and the people weren't supposed to plant trees there because the birds nest in the trees, and the birds transport the disease from one shrimp pond to another. And there's been, it's become kind of like a shrimp pandemic, and they've had incredible losses of fish. This is on the coast of Senegal. Senegal has enormously rich fishery, kind of like in Peru, but these are for sardines, sardinella, and the piles of fish you see between the boats. Those are sardines after they've been offloaded. And here it's not industrial fishing; it's all open boats. This is the biggest tuna factory in the world. This is Thai Union. This is the offloading frozen tuna for Thai Union's factory in Bangkok. And this ship had just arrived from the Marshall Islands, full of Pacific yellowfin tuna. This is the biggest fishery, one of the biggest fisheries in the world. This is the Alaskan pollock, and this is a pollock being brought in on one of the largest fishing boats in the United States fleet. This boat was over 100 meters long, and what you're seeing there, that green thing, that's the sock. It's the tip of the net that's over a kilometer long. As they open the sock, the fish go down that little grate into the hold, and inside the boat, there's an entire fish factory for heading, gutting, and flash freezing the fish. This boat produces virtually all the fish sticks from McDonald's in the United States. It's a hyper efficient fishery, and they take virtually no bycatch. It's very catch any other fish except for the pollock. And they had scientists on board to make sure they're only taking as much as the fishery could withstand, so it will last virtually in perpetuity. This is bringing in Atlantic bluefin in the Straits of Gibraltar. This is a very ancient fishery that was started by the Phoenicians, and they create a network of nets along the shores of the Straits of Gibraltar. And the tunas, they enter into the Mediterranean to spawn. They steer the coast to avoid killer whales. And they have divers go in the water. You see the divers between the ships there, and they go in and they have a spear with a CO2 tip on it, and they pop the bluefin and they kill them instantly. This is the wild salmon fishery in Alaska. It's the most bountiful wild salmon fishery in the world, and it's very tightly regulated. All those little boats are the drift net boats, and they tie up to the mothership to offload. They go out and they fish twice a day, once on each tide, and they offload their catch in the mothership, and they go back to working the mouths of the rivers where the salmon are going upstream to spawn. One of the things that I think one of the solutions to feeding 9 and soon 10 billion people on this planet is improvements in genetics. And that little brown thing on the right, you see, that's a corn cob found in an archaeological dig in Peru from the area a town called Corral, which is where irrigation was first developed in the Americas 4,500 years ago. And that little corn cob is an indication of what the size of corn used to be 4,500 years ago. And now you look at this on the left, you see a piece of corn that I found in the local market. It's just amazing how far we've come in plant genetics. This is a researcher in Germany who was looking at ancient varieties of wheat. This is a variety I believe was found in Romania about 50 years ago, and he's seeing if they can crossbreed this triple stalk with this triple head with a more stout stalk, because the head of the wheat was so heavy that it would fall over and the rats would get at it, so it wasn't a commonly planted wheat. But if they can crossbreed it, then they could have potentially a variety of wheat that's 3 times as productive as what we have today. This is a research farm in Washington State in the United States, where they're trying to find more productive and more edible varieties of wheat, white wheat that has easier milling characteristics or better baking characteristics. And there's been incredible with advances in gene technology. There have been really rapid improvements in the productivity of our farm fields. This is a research facility at the University of Arizona, outside of Phoenix, where they were working on new varieties of sunflower. And this is a robotic scanner that scans an entire field in real farm conditions. And it was 117 degrees that day. There was that's over 40 degrees centigrade, only 45 centigrade that day. And they're trying to find crops that will thrive in the kind of radical climate we're having now, is the global climate is rapidly shifting. This is growing lettuce in Japan, and this is an area that was near Fukushima, the nuclear disaster. And they're developing ways of growing food without soil, because the soil had been poisoned by the nuclear disaster. And they plant these little baby lettuces in the middle of this rotating circle, and it's all bathed in nutrient fluids. And this giant disc, it turns once a day and pushes the plants out. So after 30 days, they're at the exterior and they can be harvested. And it's a little bit labor intensive, but you can grow these anywhere. You can even set these up on Mars if you want to. It's a very efficient way of growing lettuce locally. And there have also been advances in trying to eat kinds of food that people didn't commonly eat a long time ago. This is Taiwanese squid boat off the coast of the Falkland Islands. Squid is a very targeted fishery. I don't think this squid boat has ever been photographed before in operation. And they drop high intensity lights deep into the water, and it attracts plankton. And then the squid all come up from the bottom at night to feed on the plankton, and they have these curtains of lines that descend off the sides of the boat. And as the squid come up to feed on the plankton, they get snagged and hauled onto the boat. And here you can see one of the crew members trying to untangle the lines, but these are continuously rotating lines and lures. So it's almost like for the squid, it's almost like a curtain of death around the lights. And there's so many of these boats, and the lights are so bright that you can see them in satellite photos. There are many different kinds of aquaculture, and I think these guys are going after oysters. This is in Dongxi in southern Taiwan. Fish farms for a group are south of Kaohsiung. And this is an artisanal oyster farm near Fangyuan. And I hope to return to Taiwan as soon as the pandemic dies down a little bit to continue my work on Taiwan's relationship to the sea. I think the most important thing is curiosity. And I've always been driven by curiosity. I've always wanted to see what was over the horizon. I love looking at maps, and I started imagining what different places will look like. And I just think a natural curiosity of the world is critical. And they say in my business that you want to do your research, and then you want to try one location, you want to try to forget about most of it, and then react to what you see, and be open to new ways of seeing and thinking. And so I think that kind of curiosity and openness are the key traits to being a good photojournalist. I think the first thing is to look at aerial photography as a way to tell a story, or to explain something about a particular topic or place. And so I think the important thing is to do your homework. And for example, I use drones a lot now, and so I use resources like Google Earth or Google Maps to try and figure out where I'm going to go and take pictures. Like the photographs I showed from Taiwan today, those locations were discovered by scouring Google Earth imagery and trying to find good areas. But you have to be careful, because Google Earth pictures are taken often some kind of random time of year, and what you find in the ground or from your drone could be quite different from what you see in the pictures, and also you're seeing it in a different scale. But I think research is key. I really like, for some kinds of things, I would like being up in helicopters, because you can cover more ground, you can explore. The drone has a very limited range, but helicopters are very expensive and not available in every area, and so that's a complication. But I think the most important thing is to try to have your pictures say something rather than just being kind of cool graphic pictures. I see a lot of aerial photos being done today where it's just like, a really beautiful pattern, and some guy gets his girlfriend out there in a red bathing suit, and that doesn't really do much for me. I'd rather see something that tells me something about our world. Well, I take a lot of bad pictures, and the key is to get beyond that, and you have to take a lot of bad pictures to find the good ones, and you have to look and look and look. And my success ratio is, to be honest, is relatively low. What you're seeing here are the best images taken from many, many years of hard work. But most of the time I go up there and I fail. It's quite common, and you just have to deal with that and move on to the things that work, and look for something that's unusual. I try to find things that are less known, that are interesting, and sometimes from above, everybody thinks they know, and you see it in a totally different way.